When we say that Jesus saves, often our first thought is that our sins are forgiven, and as important as that is, there's much more to salvation than just forgiveness of our sins. To save is akin to the idea of rescue. It implies some kind of dire situation or peril, like the hero who saves the damsel in distress. Let's look at some verses in the New Testament that talk about how Jesus rescues us and what perils he saves us from. First of all, Jesus rescues us from the evil power of this world. Galatians chapter 1 says, Jesus gave his life for our sins, just as God our Father planned, in order to rescue us from this evil world in which we live. Now this reminds us that Jesus died on the cross, gave his life for us, and in doing so, he rescued us not only from our sins, but also from the power of this evil world. The world around us is bent away from God. Its customs and practices are corrupt and evil. It exerts ungodly pressure on our lives. Apart from Christ, we are seduced by the world's lies and enslaved to its ways. But for those who belong to him, Jesus has rescued us from this evil world. We still live in it, but Jesus has released us from its power. He protects us from its influence, and one day he'll place us in another better world. Secondly, Jesus rescues us from the curse of the law. Galatians 3 verse 13, but Christ has rescued us from the curse pronounced by the law. When he was hung on the cross, he took upon himself the curse for our wrongdoing. When God gave Israel his law in the Old Testament, he pronounced blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. For example, if the people were unfaithful to God and his ways, they would suffer famine, drought, military defeat, and eventually destruction of the nation. But like Israel, all humanity has disobeyed God's law, so we all deserve to be cursed as well. Yet when he died on the cross, Jesus took the law's curse upon himself in our place. Because he never broke God's law himself, he was able to bear the law's curse on our behalf. Then the third thing is that Jesus rescues us from Satan's power. Colossians chapter 1 says, for he has rescued us from the kingdom of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his dear Son, who purchased our freedom and forgave our sins. In our natural condition, we were held captive under the power and dominion of Satan. Our sin put us in bondage to him, and his agenda was our destruction. But Jesus rescued us and set us free from Satan's kingdom so that he no longer rules over us because Jesus has triumphed over Satan. And those who trust in him are now under his rule and his protection, and his agenda is our redemption, and our lives now serve his purposes instead of the devil's. And finally, Jesus rescues us from God's righteous judgment. We see this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. And they speak of how you are looking forward to the coming of God's Son from heaven, Jesus, whom God raised from the dead. He is the one who has rescued us from the terrors of the coming judgment. You see, at some point in the future, Jesus is coming back, and when he comes, he'll establish his rule and conquer his enemies. That's when God will judge all of humanity. And those who disregard God's authority and go their own way will be exposed before the holy ruler and judge of the universe, and they'll be condemned and punished with terrible eternal consequences, while those who belong to Jesus are rescued from this coming judgment and will be with God forever in heaven. So the idea of salvation is multifaceted. Jesus has done so much for us. Why don't you take a few minutes to talk about that?